There's a lot of positive sentiment amongst the business community. There's a lot of euphoria. Markets are on a high, an all-time high, in fact, at this point in time. But has the situation actually changed? Has the perception about India's economic agenda, India's economic growth actually changed? Let's get a view from Mr. Neeraj Bhardwaj, MD at Carlyle Advisors Private Limited. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhardwaj, for speaking with us. Let's start with, whatever has happened. Last year, we were into a certain set of economic situation. Our growth rates were falling, sub 5% growth for several quarters. Now, in the first quarter, we saw 5.7% growth rate as far as the GDP is concerned. But nothing big, no big bang reform as such has been announced by the government so far.
I think if you look at it since May, since the new government has come into play, I think the optimism and the sentiment is a lot better. If you look at tangibly what has happened, I think the PM has actually created the position of himself as a senior statesman with his trips abroad, which is a marked change from what we had historically. I think he's delivered on the promise of maximum governance, minimum government. If you look back on what he's done with the coal allocation block, the fact that bureaucrats are working harder. And to your point, I think that there's some truth that the big bang reforms haven't happened yet, but enough positive steps have been taken. And when the budget was a middle-of-the-road budget. They didn't increase MSP prices as much as they have had historically. They do have a fiscal deficit target. Now, whether they'll meet it or not is a separate question. Project approval processes have been fast. And so I think the steps have been there in the right direction. The big bang reform, I think, in a country like India can't happen right out of the gate. I think in the next year or so, when you talk about GST, when you talk about labor and land acquisition bill, I think that is what will really prove the point. But I think the steps have been positive. My sense is that just the expectation of what could have happened from the government and how quickly it could have happened was unrealistic, and the government didn't do a good job of toning that down, which is what you do. You sort of build it up in the election period, then you tone it down afterwards. That didn't happen.
But let's talk about the fiscal deficit target first. One of the key targets which the finance minister had set for this particular year. There's no roadmap when it comes to the disinvestment as well. It all started with a lot of steam, but somewhere it just got lost. You talk about other issues. So far, whatever little steps, or you can say the repair mode that the government is in at this point in time, is, the government, what critics also say that the government is just trying to work or polish around the policies, the reform measures which were already there in place. Let's talk about the diesel deregulation. The process was already started by the previous government by increasing the prices of diesel by 50 paisa per litre. Talk about the Jan Dhan Yojana. Even that thing, financial inclusion scheme, was already running by the previous government. So there hasn't been anything really big, and there's no clear roadmap ahead that the government is now going to follow.
Once again, I agree with you partially. I do think they have added to some of the steps were taken by the previous government, but if you look at railway tariff hikes, or if you look at what they've done on the MSP side, I think the coal blocks, right, those are steps which this government has taken. To your point, I think if you looked at the last budget and heard what the finance minister said, he gave all the right noises, but you're right, the plan for how he's going to get there wasn't there, whether it's fiscal deficit, whether he talked about retrospective taxation, how you'll deal with it. I think that is what people are looking for now. But I just think we're setting a very high bar for the government to have delivered that literally in the first 6 months.
Because they only gave us high expectations. In fact, to the country, to the people of this country, they gave like really big expectations, and that's where there was a clear mandate.
And I agree with that. And I think now that they have this clear mandate, I think, if I'm in their position, I would also do the same thing. You do whatever it takes to get elected, frankly, and then you have 5 years to deliver on those promises. I think to have a report card where we're judging them in 6 months, I think it's not negative. I just think I think what people, like I said earlier, what people expected was too much. I think they've actually taken positive steps. For me, the next year will be critical. If they don't do what we were talking about, GST, have a clear roadmap for fiscal deficit. You mentioned earlier when we were chatting informally that have they got lucky? And in the context of fuel prices. They're also unlucky. The Fed has taken back on tapering. Why are we ignoring that, right?
But today, on an economic side, we are better prepared. We have enough reserves.
Yeah, but if you look at what happened last year when the Fed, they said they were going to announce tapering, the currency went, as volatile as it's ever been. If you remember the rupee at 68, right? Now we have a sense of stability. Not all of that can be credited to the current government. A lot of it has to do with Raghu Rajan and what he's done there. But in this environment, because we're more stable, we didn't have much of an impact with the Fed saying they're tapering back now. I think Japan coming into the huge QE program is going to help, and the fact that the Prime Minister actually reached out to Japan, I think we will displace Indonesia as the #1 destination for Japanese dollars. So those are the positives, but it's not entirely, they have also, we're ignoring the fact that when you look at global liquidity, that is coming down, which has been the big driver of India's growth over the last few years.
How would you assess, whatever the government has done so far, the kind of steps they've taken so far, how would you assess the Modi government at this point in time?
So, the best way to let's put a numerical ranking of this. We took a scale of 1 to 10. I think they're somewhere between a 6 to a 7. And the reason I say that is, what I said earlier, if you look at the previous government, it's so populist, right? Here, the fact that they haven't reduced MSP prices much, the fact that they're actually making move towards labor and land acquisition, they're going to table GST, in the winter session. Those are big steps. I just think it's in a country like India, it has never, ever moved as rapidly as people are expecting right now. And these are big, big changes.
Now, let's move ahead. We've spoken about the past, whatever the new government has done. Now, to continue with this momentum, growth momentum, the path that the government also wants to follow, what is it? What is that big thing that the government needs to do or should now start focusing on?
See, for me, there are 4 points, right? One is, as you said rightly before, the fiscal deficit, right? We're already at 83% of the year target, right? So it's unlikely that we'll meet that. So having a clear perspective on disinvestment.
But if the government continues to be lucky with the global commodity prices falling, our subsidy bill is going to go down.
I don't think you can take away the luck and not give the grant them when they're unlucky. So I think you take your blows as you go along, right? It's true in government, it's true in business as well, right? And the people who succeed are those who in certain cases make their own luck, but also benefit from the luck, right? And be there at the right place, right time. So I think having the fiscal deficit under control, which is going to be driven by disinvestments. I think the GST implementation and leading to better tax compliance is very important, and then also having a very clear and widespread enforcement of direct benefit transfers, right? You have to reduce the volume and the quantum of subsidies. So I think that's point number 1, which is very important. I think 2 is we really need to kickstart the investment cycle, right? So if you look at gross capital formation growth as a percentage of GDP growth, or that ratio, in the last few years has been under 1. It has to get to 1.5 to 1.8. And all the steps which are required there, which is land and labor reforms, the private-public partnerships, a very rapid movement on the high-speed rail. I mean, those steps really need to take place. So that's number 2. And number 3 is you need to have PSU reform, right? Now we are getting the situation where we have PSUs without a clear leader. And, it's fine to create the vacuum, but then you have to move very quickly to the next step. So that's the 3rd. And the 4th is from a foreign investor perspective, I think you need to have a very clear policy on tax. Right now, they've made the right noises saying that we will look into retrospective taxation, but you have to have a very clear policy, because if you ask foreign investors, they are looking for reasons to come to India, right? This is a destination, this will be a market which will be big. But we, time and time again, have always figured out a way to stymie them at the doorstep. And I think taxation, having very clear policy on that, is going to be very important.
But what's happening, considering what's happening with the e-commerce space, Flipkart, and whatever has been happening, CCI has also written about it. Do you think that's going to pose a question mark to all the foreign investors? Will it bring some kind of an uncertainty when it comes to those people coming here and investing if something like this comes up?
I mean, that is one other example of it. I think, the retrospective taxation, Vodafone, the fact that, if you acquire an asset abroad which has substantial value coming from India, a US investor might have to pay taxes to the Indian government. These things really need to be clarified, right? I think it creates a lot of uncertainty in the mind of a foreign investor. The Mauritius Treaty, GAR. I mean, there are lots of open-ended issues, which I think just having a clear policy, clear statement will help foreign investor sentiment a lot. I think it's not necessarily, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you cater to every demand that the foreign investor has, but having certainty and clarity is the most important thing.
When it comes to the ease of doing business, the ranking that everyone has been really critical about, from 138 earlier, it has even slipped further to 142. How do you think can the government improve that?
That is, and I think that is, frankly, the World Economic Forum is doing some great work in the area of anti-corruption, right? I think, there's no easy solution to that. That's the reality, right? It's a 3-part, the 3 major stakeholders: government, business, and civil society, need to play a role in this. For the government, it's very clearly enforcement. I think you need to improve the compensation structure for bureaucrats, right? And that is and reward people for clean governance, right? So that's what needs to happen on the government side. I think business needs to adhere to a policy of no corruption, right? I think because this is one where the lowest common denominator spoils it for the rest. So I think you need to create that, and there've been some positive steps in that direction. There's a charter which people have signed from businesses have signed from the World Economic Forum, and I think on civil society, especially in this age of technology and widespread information dissemination, we need to be more aware of it. And education. There's no easy answer to this question. It has to improve. If you to set up a quick service restaurant in India, it takes 170 approvals before you can set up a unit. You can't scale. I mean, that's why when we invest in companies, I give a lot of credit to Indian promoters who build businesses here. Scaling a business in India is an act of God. It is very, very difficult when you think about all the things which need to fall into place, the number of people, the management of the environment. It's very, very complicated. So people who've scaled retail outlets, built hospitals, financial service institutions, they deserve tremendous credit because this is a very, very difficult market to operate in.